So, good evening, everyone. Tonight, um, we'll have a talk and then a talk of Sri Mataji's, which chimes in with the talk I'm going to give. And then we'll have the meditation. So tonight I want to look some more at the ideas that were floating around during the time of the French Revolution at the end of the 18th century, when so much of the modern world had its genesis. But it's not really the history part of it that's important to me, so much as these ideas, the sort of basic building blocks of the ideas, which are expressed by different people at different times, but are really comparatively few in number and are still operating today. And it's because they're the contemporary nature of these ideas that makes them interesting to look at and to try to understand how our culture is, how it impacts upon us, and our attempt to establish Sahaja Yoga in the world and in ourselves. So, man is born free, but is everywhere in chains. So begins Jean-Jacques Rousseau's book, The Social Contract, published in 1762. Many people have read that and thought, that sounds right. It suggests that man is essentially a free agent and would be able to be one in practice if it were not for the way he's conditioned by his family, schooling, culture, religion, government, and society in general. A statement often seen on social media expresses the same idea in a more modern way. 5 minutes after your birth, they decide your name, nationality, religion, and sect, and you spend the rest of your life defending something you didn't choose. It can sound as though these statements are talking about the spirit, that essentially man is the spirit and is free and pure and innately virtuous. But no sooner is he born than he becomes enchained with all sorts of conditioning, which then warps or suppresses his natural virtue, and so on. The feeling that this is about the spirit is one reason why many people are still drawn to Rousseau's philosophy. But he's not really talking about the spirit at all. Spirit isn't born, it doesn't die. What Rousseau is talking about, whether he knew it or not, is the ego. His view of man became very popular in the 18th century, and it's been popular ever since. It was implicit in many of the ideas behind the French Revolution. We find it in modern views of education and criminology, and especially in the self-help industry. It's a view of man which creates a great deal of confusion for us as seekers, just because it mixes up the spirit and the ego. According to Blake, this view of Rousseau's teaches that man is righteous in his vegetated spectre, an opinion of fatal and accursed consequence to man. By spectre, he means more or less the same as our ego, and by vegetated, he means embodied or born. So he's saying that Rousseau and company are arguing that man is already virtuous as an embodied ego, but that this really isn't the case. On the contrary, says Blake, man is born a spectre, an ego, and requires a new selfhood continually. But in Rousseau's conception, the real self is this newborn ego, who is free and is supposedly unconditioned in any way, at least for a few seconds. And this conception of man is what Thomas Sowell, the economist, American economist, calls the unconstrained vision. Last time, when talking about Edmund Burke, I touched on the constrained vision, which points out that man is a conditioned being. We come into the world already conditioned or constrained, in the sense that we're born as male or female, and into a particular family, particular income bracket, place, society, and so on. Moreover, we have particular genetic aspects and karmic aspects. And on top of that, we have a particular kind of temperamental predisposition. We're individuals. So the constrained vision is a conception of man that sees him as being limited in various ways, puts the stress on, or at least it draws our attention to what has made us, our background, the past, if you like. Also, it points out that we have desires, which can lead us to do good things or bad things. In short, it's emphasizing the left side of our being. So, I mean, talking about the constrained vision, the unconstrained vision, these ideas of souls, I think that we have to understand, of course, they're only concepts, but they are useful up to a point. So by contrast, Rousseau's unconstrained vision doesn't recognize those limits, or at least it doesn't see them as part of us. Instead, it sees them as essentially alien to us, to what we really are. Essentially, we are free, and those limits, all that conditioning, make up the chains to which Rousseau was referring. Those constraints are things that have been imposed upon us. We are not them. Really, according to this way of looking at things, we are born as pretty much a blank sheet of paper, but almost immediately things are written on that sheet by our institutions, parents, education, and so on. Nowadays, even our sexuality is not seen as a given from this point of view, but as something that we're supposed to discover as we grow up. And the same with gender. It's often said now that you don't actually have a gender at birth. It's something you have to choose for yourself later on. Incidentally, this way of looking at things severely downgrades the role of the mother. She might think she's brought into the world a male baby or female baby, but it's none of her business, according to this view. She's brought into the world a baby, but what gender it is another matter, not for her. So both parents are seen as conditioning agents who belong to the subject's past rather than to his bright future. Here's another quote from Rousseau. All the vices imputed to the malignity of disposition are only the effect of the bad form it has received. There is not a villain upon earth whose natural propensity, well directed, might not have been productive of great virtues. In other words, no one's born bad. No one really has a malignant disposition and bad desires and so on. And if they turn out to behave badly, this is because they've been badly brought up, badly conditioned. Maybe they've made some bad decisions, that much is allowed. But how could they help making bad decisions when they were conditioned into making them? Now, one of the effects of this unconstrained way of thinking is that if we subscribe to it, it makes us feel very good about ourselves for thinking so well of other people, particularly of young criminals. Since we are viewing people who may have done awful things as essentially virtuous victims of cruel institutional conditioning, we ourselves, who haven't done anything wrong, apparently, must be even more virtuous. This is another reason, in fact, I would say this is the main reason, why this unconstrained vision of Rousseau's is so popular, because nowadays the ego craves being thought of as virtuous. It's very strange how this has come about. Of course, I'm not denying that there can be such things as cruel conditioning, bad childhoods, discouraging events. But the question is, how do we behave in the face of that conditioning? Do we succumb to it? Do we fight it? Do we witness it? Even in an impossible situation, we still have the freedom to choose an attitude towards that situation. But as I say, we with our ego want to forgive the bad guys because it makes us seem very good, very compassionate and forgiving. But is it compassion? Is it forgiveness? This is where the difference between compassion and sympathy, which Sri Mataji often stressed, becomes clear. For one thing, the ego can't forgive. We have to go beyond the ego to forgive. For another, this sympathetic attitude has a dehumanizing effect. It says, these people who are accused of doing bad things are not fully human because they have no free will. They can't help themselves. A while ago, I heard a doctor on the radio talking about an outbreak of drug taking among middle-aged women in the Midlands. He was very angry about it. They had no choice but to take drugs, he was arguing. I mean, that's what he actually said. Because the government was so cruel, so mean in the amount of welfare benefits it was giving them. The interviewer didn't challenge him on this. She didn't say, but wouldn't they have more money if they didn't spend it all on drugs? No, because she was an unconstrained visionary in the Rousseau manner herself, as are so many people in the media these days, so many powerful. And it was just what she wanted to hear. Yet by taking all the freedom to act away from these middle-aged women in the Midlands or the North or wherever it was, the doctor was denying them their full humanity. He seemed to be compassionate and forgiving, but he was simply letting them off the hook for the misery they were creating for themselves and everyone around them, while redirecting his anger elsewhere at the government, which he was saying was oppressing. It's noticeable that very often the oppressors who are conditioning the poor victims in cases like this are referred to in general terms. The government, the patriarchy, capitalism, and so on. Because once you start saying, well, so-and-so did this because he had a terrible childhood with an abusive father, you open yourself to the logic of saying, but that abusive father was conditioned. He was the victim of someone else, of his own abusive father maybe, and so on and so on. In which case, no one would ever be responsible for anything bad, except maybe the ultimate oppressor, the one who started it all by making people take their births without asking their permission first, God. But the modern ego doesn't believe in a God. So who can it blame? It blames the judgmentalists. These are the people who stand on the sidelines and say, wait a minute, these criminals you're letting off the hook aren't really the victims, they're actually the perpetrators. But this judgmentalism, of which I'm being guilty now, I suppose, is virtually the most serious crime, according to this Rousseau-style ideology. It's believed in this unconstrained ideology that if only a child could be brought up in such a way that he's allowed to express himself in an unhindered way, everything would be great. That's why these people, the Rousseau-style people, like the term facilitator. It sounds like there's nothing authoritarian or patriarchal about what they're doing, nothing oppressively conditioning about it. They're not heavy-handed parents or overbearing teachers, so much as enlightened facilitators, helping to bring forth the knowledge and potential which the child already possesses innately. You can be whatever you want to be. This is one of the mottos of the unconstrained visionaries, and they're going to help you to be it. Naturally, this view is appealing, and I've seen that it appeals to many Sahaja yogis. This is partly because it sounds so much nicer than the conservative, constrained vision, which is basically saying, no, you can't be whatever you want to be. Not whatever you want to be, at least not exactly. Another thing this unconstrained vision emphasizes is self-esteem. Of course, this means different things depending on how the term is used. And sometimes Sri Mataji uses it in a positive sense, as more or less synonymous with self-respect. But what I mean by self-esteem here is the kind of thing people refer to when they tell you that you should say to yourself, In the words of a self-help creed that often crops up on social media, you are worthy. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of having your heart held. You are worthy to be adored. You are worthy to be cherished. You are worthy. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to prove it. You don't have to bargain for it. You are worthy simply because you exist. It sounds very generous of the person saying it, very spiritual, almost godlike. I should add that one rarely, if ever, hears these self-appointed gurus saying to someone, you're an ordinary, average, heterosexual, not particularly vulnerable, more or less dharmic person without any real mental health issues. Well done, you. Their interest is in people whom they can categorize as vulnerable for one reason or another. Because in such cases, the kudos in being able to say, you're amazing, is so much the greater. I saw an actress delivering a piece on the same theme recently. Piece paid for by a cosmetics company. She wasn't doing it for free. Once again, it was going the rounds of Facebook and WhatsApp, and yogis were saying how good this was, what good vibrations it had, how sincere she was, how caring, how true. They didn't add how divine, but they might as well have done, because here was someone taking it upon herself to bestow upon everyone, as if it were in her gift, the right to feel good about themselves no matter what. I am worth it was her mantra, or you are worth it, since she was telling other people how much self-esteem they owed to themselves. Though presumably she felt she was definitely worth it herself, or she wouldn't have been doing this. They were worth it simply by being themselves, however they identify. I'm worth it is about owning your right to be you, to stand in your truth, she said. And being authentically you is all that matters, and no one should judge you. Of course, this is all nonsense, yet in various forms, this ideology of self-esteem permeates contemporary culture. Why is it nonsense? Because it is artificial. These are just empty words. What does it mean to say you're worth it? Worth it in what sense? According to what scale of values? In whose eyes? No transformation is required. Nothing is required. Or at the most, a simple switch is required from telling yourself you're not worth it to telling yourself you are worth it. All you have to do is own your right to be you, however messed up you might be, and however much you might be contributing to the decadence and barbarism all around us. I suppose we can say that there is some usefulness in this. If a person is really suffering from bad conditioning, it might help them shift from left side to the right side, but it's swapping one illusion for another. No ascent exists in this scheme of things. Dharma is irrelevant. If you're fine as you are, if you're authentic already, and all you have to do is accept this, if you become authentic by accepting yourself as you are and shrugging off the constraints of conditioning, then where does the idea of evolution come in? It doesn't. To bring this to a conclusion, we can return to Blake. Rousseau thought men good by nature. He found them evil and found no friend, he says. There's an amusing cautionary tale about this. Rousseau was in trouble for his rebellious anti-Catholic views with the French authorities. There was a warrant out for his arrest, and he was no safer in his native Switzerland. At this point, the historian and philosopher David Hume came to the rescue. At that time, they were probably the two most famous intellectuals in Europe. Hume was in Paris, basking in his celebrity there. I should say that I was quite surprised. I heard a talk the other day where Srimataji mentioned Hume as a realized soul. He was definitely a good person. He did help deconstruct Christianity to some extent, or at least the Catholic form of it. But anyway, he came to the rescue. a mutual friend asked him to see what he could do for Rousseau. Could he find him asylum in England? The two of them met, and Hume was more than impressed, comparing Rousseau to Socrates in a letter to a friend, and describing him as mild and gentle and modest and good-humoured. Quite a few Frenchmen tried to warn Hume of what he was taking on, but he ignored them. In 1766, he brought Rousseau to London, where Rousseau is famous as a novelist as well as a thinker, was quickly lionized. Hume set about arranging a state pension for him, finding him lodgings and so on. Meanwhile, writing to a French friend, I have never known a man more amiable and more virtuous than he appears to me. He is mild, gentle, modest, affectionate, disinterested, and above all, endowed with a sensibility of heart in a supreme degree. For my part, I think I could pass all my life in his company without any danger of our quarreling. But you can see where this is going. And of course, it didn't last. Rousseau, in my view, was a paranoid narcissist. And I could argue for this, but it's not time now. But I'll show you why this is so next time, perhaps. And soon, Rousseau began to imagine that a vast plot was being woven around him, and that at the center of that plot, pulling the strings, was none other than David Hume himself. He confronted Hume, and at last Hume was shaken out of his complacency. In spite of his friend Adam Smith, the great economist, warning him not to, he made the argument public, and it became a big cause célèbre, and it went on from there. Many commentators see Hume and Rousseau as polar opposites, the former being all considered reason and the latter all fiery emotion. But they seem to me more like two sides of the same coin. And I think Blake agreed. He lumped them together as deists. This is again a term that needs a lot of explaining, but we'll have to wait for that. And he said, Blake said, this is in his last great poem, Jerusalem. There was it's interspersed with a few short chapters addressed to the Christians, the Jews, and the deists. This one's from the deist one. And he says, Voltaire, Rousseau, Gibbon, Hume charged the spiritually religious with hypocrisy, or as we would say today, judgmentalism. And he goes on, Voltaire, Rousseau, you cannot escape my charge that you are Pharisees and hypocrites, for you are constantly talking of the virtues of the human heart, and particularly of your own, that you may accuse others, and especially the religious, whose errors you, by this display of pretended virtue, chiefly design to expose. That's true. Rousseau thought men good by nature. He found them evil and found no friend. Friendship cannot exist without forgiveness of sins. Continue. Okay, so I've spoken far too long. And now ask Priti to put on an extract from a talk of Sri Mataji's. This one was in India. She's talking about the Gita and Sri Krishna's views on this subject of sympathy.
What is the essence of dharma? For example, I have been quite surprised the way people explain him. As far as the hinsa is concerned, that Sri Krishna preached ahimsa to such an extent that we have to look after all the mosquitoes of Delhi. Such absurd things people have deducted by what Krishna tried to emphasized in Sri Gita. When the war started, Arjuna actually became nervous, I can say, and he said, I would not like to fight my own kith and kin and my gurus. So Sri Krishna says, they are already dead, they are killed. Because they were not enlightened people, are already dead people, their eyes are not open. Whom are you going to kill here? Just you have to remove some people from this earth to establish dharma. Now the idea of dharma, according to us, is some sort of a Hinduism or Islamism or some sort of a ism. It is not. Dharma is the valency in a human being. Just like carbon has 4 valencies, dharma has 10 valencies in a human being. And when a person falls down from there, then he loses his powers as a human being. One of the examples is that at the time of war, Karna, the great generous man, very well known for his great virtues, was caught up by a wheel of his chariot, and he could not take out his leg out of that chariot. When Arjuna faced him and raised his own Gandiva, and Karna challenged him, saying that I am a Veera, a chivalrous person, a person who is fighting, and you are another warrior. And in dharma, when I have no weapons on me, you cannot kill me with your weapons. That time Sri Krishna pointed at him like this, and he said, kill him. Where was his warrior virtues when Draupadi was insulted? Draupadi's insult was the greatest sin that was committed, and what was he doing at that time? And Arjuna killed Karna. This is dharma. He is called as Leeladhara, the one, for him, the whole world is a play. And that's why he says that already they are killed. That doesn't mean that you start killing people, becoming violent because you do not agree with some people. Sri Krishna can say whom to kill. You have to be a realized soul to understand why Sri Krishna had to ask him to kill and why the goddess had to kill so many demons. But the idea today is we should try to be sympathetic towards also demons and the devils who are spreading Asuri Vidya everywhere. And we should be sympathetic with all the people, and there is good in everyone. That's not Krishna's message. He showed his love by killing the demons.
So if we If we go into meditation, if we're not already, if we put our attention to this witnessing power and this forgiving power, so close to one another. If we are forgiving, we're witnessing. And how can we witness without forgiving? So I'll say a few names of Lord Krishna just to help establish this mood. So you are intelligence, holy and pure, Sri Krishna. You showed your Vishvarupa form to Sri Yashoda when she looked inside your mouth and beheld the universe. You showed it to Arjuna on the field of battle. You are Sri Yogeshwar, the Lord of Yoga. You express yourself sweetly. You hold up a mirror to those who oppress, that they may see themselves. You hold up a mirror to those who are oppressed, that they may see themselves. No prison of conditioning can contain you for a moment. Detached, you are the witness of the play of being. Detached, you are the bestower of detachment. Through your witnessing power, all manner of things are solved and dissolved. Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Shri. So, Ricky, if you'd like to play the music now, and then around 9 o'clock we'll come to a finish. So we'll end there for the evening, and I hope everyone enjoyed the meditation. I'll carry on with talking about these ideas. I think it's in a couple of weeks' time. So thank you again for joining in. Jai Shri Ram.